Hey everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Build. I'm Alex, and this is my channel where we would normally theorycraft and explore different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons, but today we've got a bit of a different video. Instead of a usual D&D 5e build, we're going to be looking at Daggerheart. About a week back, I was lucky enough to get to go play a one-shot with D&D Unoptimized and Insight Check, along with a few other friends of their channels, and we got to try the Daggerheart TTRPG system that is currently in open beta. For those that don't know, Daggerheart was created by the team that's behind Critical Role, and it is a new TTRPG meant to focus on narrative depth and collaborative storytelling. The video is currently up on D&D Unoptimized's channel, and I'll be sure to link that in the video in the description down below. And also, both D&D Unoptimized and Insight Check have a couple of videos out on Daggerheart that both share some pretty good insights and reviews about the system as a whole. This video, on the other hand, is meant to be the start of a short mini-series about theory crafting builds for this open beta Daggerheart system. I'm not necessarily going to be talking about all the rules or do a review of the system all at once. I am going to be going through a couple different character builds, and with each of these character builds I wanted to talk about and highlight one aspect of the combat rules that I actually found to be fairly crunchy. Ironically, even though the system is supposed to be narrative driven and focused on collaborative storytelling, the combat and character creation does have, at least in my opinion, a fair bit of tactical crunch to it. It almost makes this oxymoronic type system where there are a few rules that are a bit more complex than what D&D 5e has, but they're trying to go for a more rules-light system that is meant to be drawn more to narrative storytelling. Besides that though, the game was fun to play, and I always have a fun time crafting characters in any type of game system, so I thought some theory crafting would be appropriate for the open beta as well. And I wanted to take the time to use the theory crafting to sort of stress test the system a little bit in each of its sort of combat rules and mechanics. So like I said, I won't be talking about all the rules in full. I'll mainly be focusing on one or two core mechanics of the Daggerheart system as we go through each of these quick builds. However, I will try to touch on as many rules that are necessary to understand what exactly is going on in the build. If you wanted to know the full rules of the Daggerheart system though, then you can technically view them online because it's in open beta, so it's all free. However, it's a bit of a hefty document, so I'd really recommend just checking out some videos on YouTube. So with all that said, the concept for today's quick build is the character that I played in the D&D one-shot. And with that, we're also going to be focusing on two main mechanics, and that is hope, as well as talking about initiative and how combat and the initiative system in Daggerheart really works. With all that said, let's go ahead and jump over to the build. Alright, so we're over on Demiplane now, which is just a site that allows for easy character creation on a number of different TTRPG systems, and luckily enough, Daggerheart is already compatible with Demiplane, so it makes the actual character creation step a lot easier than having to sift through the big rules document and go through a bunch of different PDFs and create a character. And I really liked it for learning the system as well, because instead of creating the character from scratch on a sheet, for the most part it's just responding to a bunch of prompts. It might not be the most fun way to create a character, but for learning a new system it's actually very helpful. So going through and creating this character, I've gone ahead and started creating our Hope Bard here. I made their name the Hope Bard because that is the character build that we're going for, and I didn't really fill anything else out because a lot of the character flavor doesn't really relate to our build. Going on to the first major choice we have to make is our heritage. Looking at our heritage, we have our ancestry and our community. Our ancestry is pretty much our lineage or race or whatever else you might call it from any other TTRPG system. And for that, I have gone ahead and chosen Halfling. The reason for that is because the Halfling has the ability at the beginning of each session give everyone in your party a hope. Then you can always re-roll a 1 on your hope die. If you do, we have to take the new roll instead. This is where the beginning of our Hope Bard character really comes into play, as we're going to be trying to get as many different abilities that generate hope as possible. So I suppose since we know we're going to be a halfling and we're all about giving out hope for our character build, we should probably talk about what hope exactly is in Daggerheart. First off, Daggerheart is not a D20 system, at least not entirely. Instead, it is a 2d12 system that uses a thing called duality dice. So what I mean by that is whenever you would roll a d20 in D&D 5e to do like a skill check, an attack roll, a saving throw, something like that, in Daggerheart, you're instead rolling 2d12, with one of them selected to be a fear die and one of them selected to be a hope die. The reason it matters is because depending on which of these two dice rolls a higher number, that is going to determine whether you rolled with hope or rolled with fear. Now, the long story about this is that your total rolled on these 2d12 is going to determine if you succeed or fail at whatever you're trying to do. But if you roll with hope or roll with fear, that will adjust what the outcome of that roll is. We're not really worried about that, since those outcomes and the various things that could happen on any given roll isn't necessarily a mechanical feature. What we are worried about are the mechanical benefits that come along with rolling with hope or rolling with fear. If you roll with hope, not only does that somehow affect the outcome of what you're trying to achieve, but you also gain a hope, which is a resource that you can then spend later on character abilities or a few other things. If you roll with fear, that doesn't necessarily mean you fail, it just means the outcome will be altered the same way the roll with hope would alter the outcome of what you're trying to do. But you also generate a fear, which is a resource that the DM can use at their discretion. We're not going to be talking about fear in this video. We're pretty much primarily focusing on hope, and this character build is really all about stress testing what this new main mechanic that is kind of at the core of Daggerheart is supposed to be about. How much can we really do with hope? Is it game breaking if we have a whole bunch of hope to give out, or if we stockpile a whole bunch of hope ourselves? We want to see just how far we can push the limits of this feature. Given that any roll we make has the potential to generate us 1 hope as a resource, and that we can only ever stockpile a maximum of 5 hope, it'll be interesting to see what we can do, at least on paper, with a character that's meant to just generate and give out a lot of hope. Alright, so back over to Demiplane now. We know more or less what hope does. I didn't go into detail about everything that hope could do, but I did hint that it is used as a resource for our character, and specifically towards character abilities. We're not quite there yet at choosing abilities that will be impacted by hope. We're still actually at the beginning of character creation in our community. And now our community choice can be pretty varied. It does lend a lot to sort of more theme and narrative, but each community actually does have one mechanical ability to add to your character. So that makes it a pretty interesting choice depending on what type of character build you'd be going for. Because we're trying to make a character that's just good at generating a bunch of hope, there's none that really stand out. I won't go through each one just because there's no real need to go through each one, but I'll point out the community that I chose for my character in the playtest, since it didn't really come up during the video. I picked Seaborn because Seaborn has Safe Harbor, which says that once per session when you take a short or long rest, you may take an additional downtime action. Downtime is also handled slightly separately, or slightly differently, in Daggerheart than it is in D&D 5e. While there are still short and long rests, there's only a limited number of things you can do that are very clearly defined in Daggerheart. You also can normally only choose 2 things to do during these rests. With Seaborn and Safe Harbor as our ability, we obviously get to have 1 extra choice. And the reason I pick this is because when we're taking downtime actions, they don't have to be focused on ourselves. They could be things that help our party members. Because of this, and since I was trying to create a support-based character, I elected to take Seaborn just to have the opportunity to be able to choose 1 extra downtime action to hopefully help both ourselves during that rest, but also do something that can benefit our party members. So after we've determined our heritage, we can now go into our class. And the nice thing about Demiplane is that it has pictures here of all the various classes, as well as the little icons of their domains. In Daggerheart, each character class has 2 domains, which aren't really subclasses, they're more like broad specializations. That's kind of an oxymoron, but it'll make sense in a second. Essentially, with each class being made up of 2 domains, multiple classes can share some domains. The Bard, for example, that I picked, had access to the Grace domain and the Codex domain. Codex is more book spell casting, like a wizard would have, which it does share with the Wizard class. Whereas the Grace domain is more charisma abilities oriented towards being a party face. and it shares that domain with the rogue. There are a whole plethora of choices of class to go through, especially when you factor in what domain they could have, since the domains will affect what abilities we get to pick up later on. And I won't go through what each one could potentially do, but I already do know which one I had picked for the one-shot, and since I was scouring back then for what class could give us the most access to hope. We of course pick Bard. So when we click Bard, we can see that it lists our 2 domains. It lists our starting evasion score and damage thresholds, both of which I will cover in a different build video later on when we actually look at what evasion, damage thresholds, armor, and those sorts of mechanics in combat are. We can also see our class feature, which for the Bard is Rally. It's essentially like a bardic inspiration that's on a timer, and we don't have a number of bardic inspirations that we can use. Instead, once our timer goes off, everyone in our party just gets an extra d6 to add to a roll, which is actually really powerful just based on how rolling is different in Daggerheart than it is in D&D 5e. Going all the way down, we can see our subclass options with some flavor text about what they are, as well as what they actually will do and their abilities. We're just going to click select class for now, because then we're going to get the choices of what we want to pick for our subclass, traits, starting weapons, starting armor, inventory, etc., etc. So we're going to go to our subclass. And each class so far in Daggerheart has a choice of 2 subclasses, which you pick right away at first level, basically specializing your character right away from the get-go. While both Troubadour and Wordsmith are fairly interesting choices and can be built to be very support-oriented, I picked Troubadour because I felt that it was the better option for generating hope, because it has an ability that says hope. And that's all I was looking for at the time of character creation. Anything just with that hope keyword caught my eye. What Troubadour actually does is it is your classic bard. You get a magical instrument, and then you get 3 songs that you can play mechanically. Obviously, if you wanted to, you could play more songs than just these 3, and you don't actually have to sing or play music if you don't want to. It's just a mechanical boundary that shows that you are this Troubadour character who is meant to be playing music. And mechanically, you have 3 distinct songs that act as abilities that you can play once per session. So we know that once per session, without spending any resources, we'll be able to heal ourselves and our party members for 1 hit point. We'll be able to play a song in battle in order to make an enemy vulnerable. Vulnerable is similar to advantage in D&D 5e. And then finally, we can also play a heartbreaking song to generate a hope for both ourselves and any close allies. And that is the key ability that I was looking for, so that's why I took Troubadour. We can then go through and fill out any other prompts that either Demiplane asks us to fill out, or that might actually just appear in the actual handbook if you were to create a character at full release. And in that case, that would be like filling out our unique instrument, setting our traits, which are basically our ability scores. Now, this is all just standard array, so it's pretty straightforward. We would know that we would want presence, because that's essentially charisma, and that's also the spellcasting ability that the bard uses in Daggerheart. We would want presence to be our highest ability score, and the rest don't really matter too much. There isn't too much of an impact in terms of how we assign these right now. Obviously, they will have a major impact on rolling if you were to actually play Daggerheart, and you would want to make sure your ability scores are at least a little bit optimized. But for the purposes of our walkthrough, it doesn't really matter. Same thing with our starting weapons and starting armor. None of these really affect our build or our ability to generate hope and really stress test that mechanic from the game. And there will be builds that actually do focus a little bit more on armor and how it works, and I'll cover those in a later video. But for right now, we're just going to skip them. It's pretty much the same thing for our starting inventory, though I would reasonably say that we would want the stamina potion for a reason I'll mention later down the line. Finally, the last major choice that actually will impact our ability to generate hope are the domain deck cards. Don't be fooled, we're not actually creating any sort of deck of playing cards to use in the game. All cards in Daggerheart are just reference cards, at least for the most part. They will have your abilities on them, and as long as you have access to them, which you pretty much always will, then you can use whatever the abilities are that are on those cards. There's quite a few of them, so I'm not going to look through at each ability and what it does individually, but I'll give a brief overview. basically the 3 Grace domain cards, Deaf Deceiver, Enrapture, and Inspirational Words, are all about being more charisma oriented. I picked Inspirational Words as it allows you to mark a stress, which is another resource that I'll talk about in another video, of course. And when you do mark that stress, you can then choose an option from the list below to grant an ally who hears your inspirational words to do. You could have them clear a stress, you could have them heal a hit point, or of course, you could have them gain a hope. And that was exactly what we were looking for our Hope Bard build. So once I selected inspirational words, that basically added up to a whole lot of hope generation. We have hope being generated just by being a halfling and being in the party. We have hope generated from the fact that we're a troubadour and can play a song to give our allies hope. And now we have inspirational words, which is an ability that allows us to use a bit of stress in order to give out hope as well. That's basically a resource for a resource, and that's a pretty fair trade. Now it comes time to ask, how do we spend hope? And for that answer, we'll want to look at the domain cards from the Codex domain. Now I will say right away that in Daggerheart, you do not have to take one card from separate domains. You get 2 to choose from, right? That doesn't mean we would have to pick a Grace domain and a Codex domain card. We could have 2 abilities from the Grace domain if we wanted to be very charisma oriented, or presence oriented in this case. And if we wanted to, we could have been a bard in name only and just taken 2 Codex domain abilities and had a lot of spells. For an example of what a Codex domain ability looks like, this was the one I picked, Book of Ava. It has 3 mini spells as opposed to 1 full ability. Though actually I would argue that some of these abilities, if not each one individually, is the equivalent of something like Deaf Deceiver. Deaf Deceiver was an ability that allows you to spend a hope to gain advantage on a roll to deceive or trick an enemy, kind of like expertise in persuasion or deception. The entire ability is supposed to be equivalent to everything the Book of Ava gets you, given that in the economy of character creation, we're choosing one of these cards over the other. So somehow, Book of Ava with 2 spellcasting attacks, both Power Push and Ice Spikes, as well as a support spell, that is Tava's Armor, was apparently equivalent to getting advantage on social encounter checks. The Book of Ava I picked because it has a way to spend hope. Tava's Armor allows us to spend any hope we have to give a target we can touch 1d6 to their armor score the next time they spend an armor slot. Now again, we're talking about armor score in a later video, but what that spell basically means is that we're just really buffing their defenses and hopefully completely blocking the next hit that they will take. We can't stack Tava's Armor multiple times onto a single creature, but we were able to cast it on multiple creatures at once because there's no concentration rule in Daggerheart, at least not yet. That means that with the amount of hope that we'd be generating throughout a session, we'd be able to really easily spend it as well in order to protect our allies. And since I was going for a support bard, it felt like a pretty proper spell for us to take. Plus, because they're all part of the same card, we got 2 extra spell attacks to use at the same time. All in all, it was a pretty good deal. After that, we then would pick our experiences as well as do more descriptions, answer background questions, create connections, all of which is more narrative flavor that is admittedly very important to the Daggerheart system and the story you'd be playing through, but it isn't really important for us in character creation. Experience is a unique thing because that kind of acts like what skills would do in D&D 5e, only we have free reign to choose what those skills, quote unquote, are. We could say that for our experiences, we had experience in instruments, meaning that anytime we play an instrument, we might be able to spend a hope to gain a bonus to that role specifically. Experience is essentially very versatile skills that you have to spend hope to be able to use. So, since we're a bard that's meant to generate lots of hope, we could choose very broad experiences that we think will apply to a lot of skill situations or possibly even in combat situations, and then we could spend the hope to just gain a number bonus to whatever roll we're making that relates to that experience. Admittedly though, for the one shot that we ran, I didn't really worry too much about the experiences and trying to min-max them. I just decided to pick 2 experiences that I felt were thematic for my character, and they never really came up. So now that we've generated our character, here is their character sheet. There was a section where we could have gone through and leveled up the characters, but that isn't really something I'm too worried about, as there's probably not that much of a point to go through and theory craft a full level 10 character build, which level 10 is the max level in Daggerheart. Given that all the rules for Daggerheart are in open beta right now and are subject to change, anything that shows up in this build or future builds that I do for the Daggerheart system as it stands right now are all subject to change, and they might fall apart at the next iteration of testing. So looking at our character sheet, I wanted to use this to sort of symbolize what we could fully do in combat, as well as talk about the initiative system as well, since we sort of know what Hope is supposed to do. At least I would hope at this point. So down here we have our effects and features. We can see everything all in one place. We have our inspirational words, our Book of Ava. We can see our troubadour songs that we can play, each per long rest actually, not once per session. I think I said once per session before, but each one can be done once per long rest, which is pretty nice. We can also see way down here our community ability that is once per session for Safe Harbor, and our little lucky ability, and just how being a halfling gains an extra hope and allows us to always reroll a 1 on our hope die. So going up to the top here, let's focus on what hope really does for us right away. We know that we start each session with 2 hope. Because we're a halfling, that actually becomes 3 hope. Then, right away, since we are a bard, and this was more of a strategy I was going for on the one-shot, but it didn't really work out the way I had exactly planned it, but that was fine, it didn't really change too much. Theoretically though, what we could do is, since we're already starting with 3 hope as a halfling, we could then immediately play a heartbreaking song, since we can do it at any time, meaning we could do it outside of combat, as well as inside of combat, and we can just generate an extra hope, going up to 4. Then, after we've generated 4 hope, we could go down to our inspirational words, mark 1 stress for each member of our party, since that is just completely repeatable, and the only thing that limits us is the amount of stress we have. Assuming we only have 3 other party members, because we're a party of 4 total, we could just mark 3 stress. We don't really want to be at 5 full stress, that's kind of a bad spot. Just know that it's kind of like maxing out a stamina bar in a video game. You're going to be really constrained on what you can do if you're maxed out. We could risk that by gaining 3 stress to immediately give our other 3 members an extra hope, meaning they would all start off the session fresh at 5 full hope. They would then be able to spend that hope on things like their experiences that I did not name, or they could do other abilities, much like how our Tava's armor has an ability that can be used to spend hope with. And in fact, that's something that we could do right at the beginning of this session as well. We could just go around to each one of our party members, spend a hope, and since there's no concentration or real casting time, we could just get rid of all 4 of our hope. Since we would have only had 4, not 5 at the beginning of this session, we just spend them all and give each one of our party members, including ourselves, a +1 d6 to their armor score, effectively negating the first hit. It should be noted that because hope goes up to a maximum of 5 and will spill over if any more gets collected, it may be worth it to hold off on giving our party members this much hope right away at the beginning of a session and let them generate some for themselves through the duality die. Okay, so now we're back to talk about the summary of the build, as well as a few other notes on how initiative and combat really worked. Well, as hopefully you saw through the walkthrough of our character sheet, we generate a lot of hope. You're supposed to start with 2 at the beginning of a session, and we have the potential to get our party members up to 5, which is really absurd. It's so absurd, in fact, that we probably don't even need that much hope at the beginning of a session anyways, but we have access to it if we really want to. We can do a lot of those support abilities in combat, and that's why out of all the character builds that I will be doing, I wanted to talk about initiative in combat on our support bard. The initiative system in Daggerheart is non-existent. There's not an initiative track. Instead, it's just players get to choose the order that they want to go in. Technically, if players want to take multiple turns back to back, they can. The only thing that prevents them from going is if the GM will spend fear to interrupt their turns, or if they end up rolling with fear. The thing that's interesting about this is because initiative is so laxed, and because our turns don't really end until we give an action roll, this really opens the door for support characters to shine. Those abilities that I was talking about with my bard, the inspiring words, the troubadour song, because both of them pretty much said at any point in time they could be done, and they didn't require an action roll, that means that I could either A, do each of them on my turn before performing an action roll, or I could perform them while someone else is about to do an action roll on their turn. Again, there really are no turns. If someone says they're going to move and then attack someone, I could say, hey, I'm going to play a song to give you a hope, so that way when you do go to attack them, you'll have that hope to spend on your attack. You still get to move, I'm not really interrupting or preventing you from doing anything there, but you'll still get the action roll. Obviously, this type of initiative system raised questions and concerns about people being spotlight hogs, or potentially being problematic players at the table and just sort of taking up a bunch of actions. And I do think that is a valid concern, but it's a concern that also exists in D&D. And while that is all very valid to point out, what is also nice is the fact that that type of system really helps support characters. I think it is so cool to be able to be a character that is meant to be helping their teammates out, and instead of being relegated to a turn order to say, I'm going to help you, I'm going to cast this on you now, and hopefully you will be able to use it on your turn, but then all of a sudden something interrupts you. For example, maybe we cast Bless on a party member in D&D 5e, and then before the party member can actually go and use Bless on their turn, we get hit with an attack and we lose concentration. That would be really kind of unfortunate since we just wasted the Bless, more or less. In Daggerheart, though, that is kind of gone, since the DM is only going to interrupt us if they have the fear to be able to spend to do that, and for the most part, we'll be able to see that coming. And we can jump in at any point in time with other support abilities to be able to help out our party members. So as long as nobody's interrupting each other with action rolls, this allows players to really tactically work together and collaborate in order to go up against the encounters that they're facing, making room for support characters to shine and get big cinematic moments, like providing a bunch of bonuses to their allies who are about to go and do some major Nova Bomb attacks, is really cool and would make a support character feel really great at the table. All in all, the combat when we played in the one-shot flowed pretty smoothly, and although it's supposed to be smooth for a more narrative dynamic, it felt tactically nuanced given that you can collaborate so well with your team to be able to decide who's going to do what action roll when, and who is able to buff and help out each other with the action rolls that they want to accomplish in the first place. It really opens a good spot for support characters, and it's very fun to see the limits that a support character can do with a build like our Hope Bard. We can generate so many resources that the game is going to sort of generate for us already, but because we can do it on demand, that gives us a lot more control over the flow of the game, at least in combat terms, since instead of waiting for a lucky roll to be able to get a hope to then use on a powerful ability, we can just give out a hope to our party members who want to do those powerful abilities. I hope you enjoyed the video on Daggerheart and that it was at least a little bit informative, and I hope that you liked the build as well and saw how sort of fun, kooky, or absurd it could be. Again, it's all playtest material, so it's not necessarily supposed to be a really powerful, oh this is so cool type of build. It's just an option that we could do that is meant to stress test the rules of the beta. Thank you so much for coming on the journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.